In a galaxy where species are ranked by their technological prowess and mental capabilities, humans have always been considered the weakest link. While they can process quantum calculations in their sleep and they can manipulate matter with their minds, humans barely scrape together enough primitive technology to reach the stars. The Galactic Elite Space Academy has stood for 3,000 years as the ultimate proving ground for the galaxy's most gifted beings. Only the top 0.001% of each species' population can even dream of acceptance. The entrance examinations have broken the minds of genius level and left crystalline overlords weeping silicon tears. No human has ever been accepted. No human has ever even been allowed to take the entrance exam. Until now. When Maya's application appears in the Academy's quantum databases, it sparks outrage, confusion, and disbelief across 12 star systems. A human? At the Academy? It has to be some kind of administrative error, a cosmic joke, or perhaps an elaborate prank by the mischievous species. But Maya's test scores don't lie. Her results don't just meet the Academy's impossibly high standards. They shatter them completely, achieving levels that shouldn't be possible for any organic mind. The Academy's ancient evaluation systems, designed by the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, can't even properly categorize what they're seeing. As whispers spread through the cosmic networks and betting pools open on how quickly the primitive human will wash out, no one suspects the truth. Maya isn't just humanity's first Academy student. She's something the galaxy has never encountered before. Something that will challenge everything they thought they knew about intelligence, evolution, and the true potential that lies hidden within the species they've dismissed as cosmic backwater dwellers. The Academy's doors are about to open for a human, but they have no idea what they're actually letting in. Maya stood before the massive crystalline gates of the Galactic Elite Space Academy, her worn Earth-standard environmental suit looking painfully out of place among the sleek, shimmering forms of her fellow first-year students. The Academy's main entrance stretched 300 meters into the artificial atmosphere of Station Prometheus, its surface carved from a single piece of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue energy. Around her, beings from dozens of different worlds chatted in languages that her universal translator could barely keep up with. A towering student floated past, its translucent body rippling with colors that conveyed complex mathematical concepts to its companion. Maya watched as tiny geometric patterns formed and dissolved within the creature's semi-liquid form, each shape representing calculations that would take her species' most advanced computers hours to complete. They didn't even seem to be trying. This was just casual conversation for them. "Hey, look," whispered a voice behind her. Maya turned to see two students, their silver skin gleaming under the station's artificial sunlight. Their oversized craniums pulsed with neural activity as they communicated through direct mind link, but their vocal cords still worked well enough to make snide remarks. "It's the human. I heard she actually thinks she belongs here." The taller's 4 eyes focused on Maya with undisguised contempt. "I give her 3 days before she cracks. Humans can barely handle their own planet's physics, let alone multi-dimensional engineering." Maya kept her expression neutral, though inside she felt a familiar knot of frustration forming in her stomach. She'd been hearing variations of this conversation for the past 6 months, ever since news of her acceptance had leaked to the galactic networks. Forums across 12 star systems had exploded with debate, mockery, and conspiracy theories about how a primitive human had managed to fool the Academy's selection algorithms. The irony wasn't lost on her. These beings thought they knew everything about human limitations, but they'd never bothered to actually study her species beyond their initial first contact assessments 3 centuries ago. They saw Earth's relatively simple technology and assumed they understood human potential completely. It was a mistake that might cost them more than they realized. "Attention, first-year students," announced a voice that seemed to come from the crystal gates themselves. The words bypassed Maya's translator entirely, appearing directly in her mind with perfect clarity. "Orientation will begin in 10 minutes. Please proceed to Assembly Hall 7 Alpha." The crowd of students began moving toward the entrance, and Maya found herself swept along in a tide of exotic beings. A group of crystalline overlords clicked past on their geometric legs, their bodies chiming like wind chimes with each step. She nearly stumbled when a shapeshifter accidentally brushed against her, its unstable form briefly adopting her appearance before snapping back to its preferred state, a vaguely humanoid figure made of what looked like liquid starlight. Sorry about that, the shapeshifter said, its voice like singing crystal. Your neural patterns are really unusual. I couldn't help but copy them for a moment. Maya nodded politely, but internally she felt a spike of concern. Shapeshifters were notorious for their ability to read and replicate biological systems, but they usually found human patterns boring and predictable. If this one found her unusual, it might mean she wasn't hiding her true nature as well as she'd hoped. The assembly hall was a vast spherical chamber that conventional geometry. Students found themselves standing on what appeared to be the inside surface of a hollow globe, with other groups of first-years visible, above, and to the sides, all somehow experiencing normal gravity relative to their position. Maya's human brain struggled to process the impossible architecture, while her alien classmates seemed to take it in stride. At the center of the sphere, a figure materialized from what looked like pure energy. Dean was a being of legend, one of the few individuals who'd achieved transcendence beyond physical form while retaining their original personality. Their species had evolved past the need for bodies eons ago, but chose to manifest as a shifting pattern of light and geometric forms that somehow conveyed both authority and ancient wisdom. Welcome, students, to your first day at the Galactic Elite Space Academy, began, their voice resonating through dimensions Maya couldn't even name. You represent the finest minds from 47 different species across 19 galaxies. Each of you has demonstrated capabilities that place you in the top percentile of your civilization's intellectual elite. The dean's form shifted, and suddenly Maya could see data streams flowing around the chamber, holographic displays showing test scores, genetic analyses, and psychological profiles. Her human eyes couldn't process most of the information, but she caught glimpses of numbers that made her heart race. These weren't just smart individuals. They were statistical outliers, beings whose mental capabilities pushed the very boundaries of what their species considered possible. However, continued, intelligence alone is not sufficient for success at this institution. The Academy exists to push the boundaries of knowledge itself, to explore the deepest mysteries of the universe, and to prepare the next generation of cosmic leaders. This requires not just mental prowess, but adaptability, creativity, and the courage to challenge everything you think you know. A hive-mind collective of insect-like beings clicked in what Maya assumed was approval. Their shared consciousness allowed them to process information at incredible speeds, but she'd read that they sometimes struggled with truly original thinking. Their collective nature made them excellent at optimization, but poor at paradigm shifts. Your first week will consist of placement examinations, the dean announced. These assessments will determine your course loads and research assignments for the remainder of the semester. Unlike the entrance examinations you've already passed, these tests are designed to find your absolute limits. We expect most of you to fail at least some portions. A nervous energy rippled through the assembly. Maya noticed that even the supremely confident students were shifting uncomfortably. If the Academy expected their hand-picked geniuses to fail, then the upcoming challenges were going to be truly brutal. I must also address the unusual situation we have this year, said, and Maya felt every eye in the chamber turn toward her. For the first time in Academy history, we have accepted a human student. This has generated considerable discussion throughout the galactic community. The dean's form pulsed with what might have been amusement. Many of you have expressed doubts about whether a member of such a young and technologically limited species can keep pace with your more advanced civilizations. I encourage you to hold on to those doubts. They will make the lessons you're about to learn all the more educational. Maya forced herself to maintain a calm expression, but inside she was seething. She'd spent her entire life being underestimated, first by her fellow humans who couldn't understand how she processed information so differently, and now by aliens who saw her entire species as cosmic primitives. Part of her wanted to drop her carefully maintained facade and show them exactly what a human could do when properly motivated. But not yet. The timing wasn't right, and she had too much to learn about her fellow students first. Better to let them continue underestimating her while she gathered intelligence about their capabilities and weaknesses. Your dormitory assignments and class schedules have been uploaded to your personal data cores, announced. Placement examinations begin tomorrow at 800 Standard Galactic Time. I suggest you use this evening to familiarize yourselves with the Academy's facilities and perhaps get to know your fellow students. You'll be working closely together for the next several years, assuming you survive the curriculum. As the assembly dissolved into smaller groups of chattering students, Maya found herself standing alone near one of the chamber's impossible walls. She pulled up her schedule on her basic human tablet, nodding the looks of surprise from nearby aliens who used direct neural interfaces or organic data storage. Her course load looked intimidating even to her enhanced perception. Multidimensional physics, advanced xenobiology, quantum engineering, galactic history and politics, and something called applied impossibility theory. "Excuse me," said a soft voice behind her. Maya turned to see a young ethereal approaching, one of the rare energy-based from the Andromeda spiral. The creature looked like a humanoid figure made of shifting aurora, beautiful but alien in ways that made Maya's eyes water if she looked directly at them. "You're the human, aren't you?" Maya nodded cautiously. "That's me, and you are." "But most beings just call me Lux," the ethereal replied, their voice carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass Maya's ears entirely. "I wanted to introduce myself because, well, I know what it's like to be different here." That was interesting. Ethereals were incredibly rare. There were fewer than 1,000 known individuals of their species in the entire galaxy. They were also notoriously difficult to understand, even by Academy standards. Their thought processes operated on principles that most organic minds couldn't even comprehend. "Different how?" Maya asked. Lux's form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. "My species doesn't typically interact with solid matter very much. We exist primarily in energy states that most beings can't perceive. When I applied to the Academy, there was considerable debate about whether I could even participate in classes designed for corporeal students." Maya studied the ethereal more closely. Now that she was paying attention, she could see the effort it was taking for Lux to maintain their semi-solid form. Tiny sparks of energy constantly bled away from their edges, and their outline wavered like heat shimmer. "But you made it work," Maya observed. "With modifications," Lux admitted. "The Academy had to design special interaction fields for me, and I have to wear this containment matrix to prevent my energy from interfering with sensitive equipment." They gestured to what looked like a jewelry made of crystallized light wrapped around their torso. "It's restrictive, but worth it for the opportunity to learn." Maya felt an unexpected kinship with the strange being. Here was someone else who'd had to fight just for the right to be here, someone who understood what it meant to be seen as an impossible outsider. "What's your field of study?" she asked. "Energy dynamics and dimensional mechanics," Lux replied. "I'm hoping to bridge the gap between energy-based and matter-based understanding of universal forces. Most beings think of energy and matter as separate things, but from my perspective, they're just different expressions of the same underlying reality." Before Maya could respond, a new voice interrupted their conversation. Well, what do we have here? The human and the light show bonding over their mutual inadequacy." Maya turned to see 3 students approaching, 2 and a... She recognized the taller from earlier, and from the way the others deferred to him, she guessed he was some kind of leader among the first years. "Or," Lux said quietly, their light dimming, "I should have expected you'd find us." Or the corrected, his cranium pulsing with bright neural activity. "Third heir to the Science Consortium, graduated top of my class from the Arcturus Institute, scored in the 99.8 percentile on the Academy entrance examinations." He looked down at Maya with unconcealed disdain. "And you're the statistical anomaly that somehow tricked the selection algorithms into thinking a human could compete at this level." Maya kept her voice level. "I prefer to think of myself as an underestimated variable in a poorly constructed equation." The floating beside or rippled with what might have been amusement. "She has spirit, I'll give her that, but spirit won't help her when she's staring at a quantum mechanics problem that would stump a crystalline overlord." "We should be kind," said the second, though her tone suggested anything but kindness. "It's not her fault that her species' neurons fire so slowly. She probably can't even process what we're saying in real time." Actually, Maya was processing their conversation, their body language, their bioelectrical patterns, the micro-fluctuations in the station's artificial gravity, the electromagnetic signatures from 17 different pieces of technology within 50 meters, and at least a dozen other data streams simultaneously. But she saw no reason to correct their misconceptions. "I appreciate your concern for my cognitive limitations," she said instead. "I'm sure I'll learn a lot from watching how proper advanced beings handle the coursework." Or's eyes narrowed, Something in her tone had caught his attention. Perhaps he was more perceptive than the others. You know what? I think a little wager might be educational for everyone involved. When we get our placement exam results tomorrow, what do you say we compare scores? What kind of wager? Maya asked, though she already suspected where this was going. If you score higher than me on any section of the placement battery, I'll publicly acknowledge that humans might have some previously unrecognized potential, Or said. But when you score lower than me on every single test, which we both know you will, you admit that you don't belong here and withdraw from the academy voluntarily. The challenge hung in the air between them. Maya was aware that other students had stopped their conversations to listen. This was exactly the kind of spectacle she'd been hoping to avoid, but backing down now would be seen as weakness. And if I refuse the wager, she asked, then everyone here will know that even you don't believe you belong among your intellectual superiors, the said, its liquid form rippling with satisfaction. Maya looked around at the watching faces, dozens of the galaxy's supposed finest minds, all waiting to see how the primitive human would respond to being challenged by her obvious betters. Some looked curious, others dismissive, a few almost pitying, but none of them looked like they expected her to actually win. Perfect. All right, she said, extending her hand toward or in the traditional human gesture of agreement. You've got yourself a wager. The looked at her outstretched hand with confusion before one of his companions whispered something about human customs. He reluctantly reached out and grasped her fingers briefly, his silver skin cold against her palm. Excellent, Or said, this should be educational for all of us. As the group dispersed and conversations resumed, Lux drifted closer to Maya. Are you sure about this? The ethereal asked, their voice barely audible. Or isn't just academically gifted? His family has been funding academy research for centuries. He has access to preparation materials and tutoring resources that most students can only dream of. Maya smiled, and for just a moment, something flickered behind her eyes that made Lux's energy form waver in surprise. Don't worry about me, she said quietly. I have a feeling tomorrow's exams are going to be very interesting indeed. But as she made her way toward her assigned dormitory, Maya's mind was already racing through calculations and possibilities. She'd managed to get through the academy's entrance examinations without revealing too much of her true capabilities, but the placement tests were going to be different. They were designed to find absolute limits, to push students past their breaking points. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Maya allowed herself a small, dangerous smile. Her fellow students thought they knew what humans were capable of. Tomorrow, she'd begin the process of teaching them just how wrong they were. The education was about to begin, and it wasn't going to go the way anyone expected. The placement examination hall was a cathedral of impossibility, its walls stretching into dimensions that Maya's human eyes couldn't quite track. Hexagonal testing pods floated in perfect geometric arrangements throughout the space, each one designed to isolate its occupant from external influences while monitoring every aspect of their mental and physical performance. Maya watched as her fellow students settled into their assigned pods with varying degrees of confidence. Or caught her eye from across the hall and tapped his temple in what she assumed was meant to be a mocking gesture. His neural implants were clearly visible beneath his silver skin, pulsing with preparation algorithms that his family had probably spent millions of credits to develop. Maya nodded politely in return, though inwardly she was calculating the electromagnetic signatures those implants were generating and wondering how they might interfere with the Academy's monitoring systems. Student, please proceed to pod 247, announced the same disembodied voice from yesterday's orientation. Maya walked across the hall, noting how conversations died down as she passed. She'd become something of a celebrity among the first years, not because anyone expected her to succeed, but because her inevitable failure was going to be so spectacular. Her testing pod was a smooth oval chamber about 3 meters long, lined with sensors that she couldn't even begin to identify. As she settled into the form-fitting chair, neural interface cables emerged from hidden compartments and moved toward her head. Maya tensed involuntarily before remembering that Academy technology was designed to work with any known form of consciousness. The cables settled against her temples with surprising gentleness, and suddenly her awareness expanded beyond the confines of her human senses. Information flowed directly into her mind, not through her eyes or ears, but through pathways she hadn't even known existed. The sensation was overwhelming at first, like trying to drink from a waterfall, but Maya forced herself to adapt. Around her, she could sense the other students beginning their own examinations, their thought patterns visible as colored streams in her enhanced perception. "Welcome to the Academy Placement Assessment Battery," said a voice that seemed to speak directly to her consciousness. "You will be presented with 7 categories of examination, each designed to evaluate different aspects of cognitive function. Please note that these assessments are adaptive. They will continue increasing in difficulty until they reach the limits of your capabilities. Do not be discouraged by eventual failure. This is expected and necessary for proper evaluation." The first test materialized around her, a 3-dimensional maze of pure mathematics that existed only in conceptual space. Maya found herself navigating through geometric structures that represented complex equations, each step requiring her to solve increasingly difficult problems. Basic algebra gave way to multivariable calculus, then to quantum probability matrices, then to mathematical concepts that didn't even have names in any human language. She moved through the maze with steady precision, her enhanced mind processing calculations faster than most computers. But she was careful to maintain the appearance of effort, occasionally pausing as if confused or overwhelmed. Through the neural link, she could sense the examination system cataloging her responses, noting her reaction times and solution methods. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the mathematical maze dissolved and was replaced by a spatial reasoning challenge. Maya found herself in a space where geometry worked differently, where parallel lines intersected, where spheres had negative volume, where distance was measured in colors rather than meters. The test required her to navigate through impossible architectures, while keeping track of her position relative to landmarks that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. This was where Maya expected most human students to fail completely. Her species had evolved in a universe with 3 spatial dimensions and relatively simple physics. Their brains weren't designed to handle the kind of multidimensional thinking that was routine for beings like the crystalline overlords or the ethereals. But Maya wasn't exactly a standard human. She moved through the impossible space with increasing confidence, her mind automatically adjusting to each new geometric paradigm. She could feel the examination system growing more puzzled with each successful navigation, pushing the difficulty higher and higher until she was dealing with spatial relationships that would normally require years of study to comprehend. The third test was xenobiology, a holographic laboratory filled with alien specimens that she'd never encountered before. Maya was required to analyze their cellular structures, predict their behavioral patterns, and develop theoretical medical treatments for various exotic diseases. The specimens ranged from familiar silicon-based to energy beings that existed partially outside normal space-time. This was actually one of the easier sections for her, though she was careful not to let that show. The patterns were obvious once she looked for them: how quantum fluctuations affected cellular repair mechanisms, how electromagnetic fields influenced consciousness in gas giant dwellers, how temporal parasites affected the aging process in immortal species. She provided correct answers while deliberately introducing minor errors to suggest the limits of human understanding. By the time she reached the 4th section, Maya was starting to understand the true scope of what the Academy was trying to accomplish. These weren't just tests of intelligence or knowledge. They were assessments of mental flexibility, of the ability to think in ways that transcended species-specific limitations. The Academy was looking for minds that could adapt to any challenge, no matter how alien or impossible it might seem. The quantum engineering section presented her with a broken, faster-than-light drive from a civilization that had been extinct for millions of years. Maya was given access to fragmentary technical manuals written in dead languages, and asked to not only repair the device, but to improve upon its design. The challenge required her to reverse engineer technology based on physical principles that contradicted everything most species thought they knew about the universe. Maya dove into the problem with enthusiasm, though she was careful to mask her excitement as determination. The drive's quantum matrices were elegant in their complexity, using folded spacetime as both an energy source and a computational medium. She could see how to not only repair it, but how to increase its efficiency by nearly 40%, though she settled for a more modest 15% improvement that would seem impressive without being impossible. The 5th test was the one she'd been dreading: applied impossibility theory. Maya had done research on this subject during her preparation for the academy, but the available information had been frustratingly vague. Most sources described it as the study of phenomena that cannot exist according to known physical laws, but do exist anyway. It was reportedly the Academy's most advanced course, reserved for students who had already mastered conventional physics to the point where they needed to learn how to think beyond the possible. The test environment materialized as a laboratory that hurt to look at directly. Equipment and specimens floated in spaces that existed in negative time, their functions governed by principles that seemed to actively resist understanding. Maya was presented with a series of paradoxical scenarios and asked to develop working solutions. First scenario involved a star that was both completely dark and blindingly bright simultaneously, somehow managing to be in two mutually exclusive states without collapsing into quantum uncertainty. Maya studied the impossible object for several minutes before realizing that the solution required her to abandon binary thinking entirely. The star wasn't switching between states or existing in both states. It was existing in a third state that incorporated elements of both while being neither. Once she grasped that concept, the rest of the scenarios became manageable. A planet that existed everywhere in the galaxy at once but could only be visited from specific locations. A species that had evolved backwards through time until they became their own ancestors. A mathematical equation that was simultaneously true and false, but whose truthfulness could be changed by observing it. Maya worked through each paradox methodically, her mind adapting to logical frameworks that would have driven most beings insane. She could feel the examination system growing increasingly excited as she progressed, its sensors detecting brainwave patterns that it had never recorded before. For the first time since beginning the test, Maya worried that she might be revealing too much. The sixth section was galactic history and politics, which should have been Maya's weakest area. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 3 centuries, and most of that time had been spent on the periphery of major events. Her species simply didn't have the deep cultural knowledge that beings like thee or took for granted. But Maya had spent her life studying patterns, and history was just another pattern to decode. She analyzed the rise and fall of interstellar civilizations, predicted the outcome of current political tensions, and even provided insights into historical mysteries that had puzzled for. Her human perspective, free from the cultural biases that affected most galactic citizens, allowed her to see connections that others had missed. The final section was labeled simply as Integration Challenge. Maya found herself in a virtual environment that combined elements from all the previous tests. She had to navigate impossible geometries while solving quantum equations, all while treating alien patients and negotiating complex political scenarios. The environment grew increasingly chaotic as different challenges interfered with each other, creating compound problems that required her to think on multiple levels simultaneously. This was where Maya finally allowed herself to truly perform. She moved through the challenge like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of pure thought. Mathematical solutions became architectural frameworks for impossible structures. Biological insights informed her understanding of quantum mechanics. Political negotiations provided the social dynamics needed to coordinate paradoxical entities. Everything connected, every solution enabling new possibilities. The virtual environment grew more complex in response to her success, throwing increasingly impossible scenarios at her, until she was dealing with challenges that the Academy's own professors would have struggled to comprehend. Maya lost herself in the flow of pure problem-solving, her consciousness expanding to encompass perspectives that no single being should have been able to maintain. When the test finally ended, Maya found herself back in her pod, gasping as her awareness contracted back to normal human dimensions. The neural interface cables retracted, and she sat in stunned silence for several moments as her enhanced perceptions faded back to baseline. Around her, she could hear other students emerging from their own pods. Some were celebrating what they perceived as successful performances, while others looked shaken or defeated. She caught sight of Or across the hall. He appeared confident, though she noticed a slight tremor in his hands that suggested the tests had pushed him harder than he'd expected. "Attention students," announced the disembodied voice. "Preliminary results will be available in 6 hours. Final scores and course placements will be distributed tomorrow morning. You are dismissed until then." As Maya stood and left her pod, she noticed that several Academy staff members were watching her with unusual interest. A cluster of floating sensor drones had gathered near her testing station, their readings apparently requiring immediate analysis. Whatever they'd detected during her examination, it had clearly gotten someone's attention. Lux was waiting for her near the hall's exit, their energy form flickering with what might have been anxiety. "How did it go?" the ethereal asked quietly. "Hard to say," Maya replied, though privately she was fairly certain she'd performed better than anyone expected. "The tests were definitely challenging. How about you?" "I think I did well on the energy dynamics sections, but the biological components were difficult for me to understand," Lux admitted. "My species doesn't really have analogs for organic cellular processes." As they walked together toward the student common area, Maya noticed that other students were giving them a wide berth. Word had apparently spread about her wager with Or, and no one wanted to be associated with the human who was about to be humiliated in front of the entire first-year class. "Maya," Lux said suddenly, their voice even quieter than usual. "During the test, did you notice anything unusual about the monitoring systems?" Maya's attention sharpened. "What kind of unusual?" "The energy patterns around your testing pod were different from everyone else's," Lux explained, their form rippling with uncertainty. "My species is naturally sensitive to electromagnetic phenomena, and I could sense the Academy's sensors working much harder to analyze your responses. It was almost like they were encountering something they hadn't been designed to measure." That was troubling news. Maya had been careful to modulate her performance, but apparently not careful enough. If the Academy's systems had detected anomalies in her neural patterns, it could complicate her mission significantly. "I'm probably just generating unusual readings because human brain structure is so different from the norm," she said, though she made a mental note to be more cautious in future examinations. "The systems are probably just having trouble categorizing my responses." Before Lux could reply, a commotion near the hall's main entrance caught their attention. Or was holding court with a group of admiring students, regaling them with stories of how he'd mastered each section of the placement battery. "The quantum engineering scenario was trivial once I applied AL dynamics to the spatial matrices," he was saying, his cranium pulsing with self-satisfaction. "And the impossibility theory section simply required proper application of advanced logic frameworks. Really, the only challenge was preventing myself from solving the problems too quickly." Maya rolled her eyes, though she had to admit his confidence was impressive. Most students looked exhausted after the placement examinations, but or seemed energized by the experience. "Of course," he continued, raising his voice as he noticed Maya approaching, "I'm sure our human friend found the experience quite educational. Perhaps she learned something about the difference between primitive and advanced thinking." "Oh, it was definitely educational," Maya agreed pleasantly. "I learned quite a lot about the nature of problem-solving under pressure." Something in her tone made or pause, but his ego quickly reasserted itself. "Well, I suppose we'll see tomorrow who was better educated. I hope you're prepared to honor our wager when the results come in." "Absolutely," Maya said. "I always honor my commitments." As the crowd dispersed, Maya found herself wondering just how much trouble she'd created for herself. Her performance on the placement exams had almost certainly exceeded what anyone expected from a human student, but she wasn't sure by how much. If she'd overplayed her hand, she might find herself under unwanted scrutiny from Academy officials who would want to understand how she'd achieved such results. But there was no going back now. Tomorrow, everyone would see her scores, and her carefully maintained facade of human limitation would either hold up under scrutiny or collapse completely. Either way, the Academy was about to get its first real lesson in why it was dangerous to underestimate the species they dismissed as cosmic primitives. Maya allowed herself a small smile as she headed back to her dormitory. Win or lose, tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. The Academy's main data hall buzzed with nervous energy as first-year students gathered to receive their placement examination results. Holographic displays flickered to life throughout the cavernous space, each one showing rankings and course assignments for different species and specializations. Maya stood near the back of the crowd, trying to project an air of calm resignation while her enhanced senses every conversation and micro-expression around her. Or held court near the central display platform, his confidence apparently unshaken despite a night's worth of waiting. His supporters, mostly other and a few ambitious hangers-on, clustered around him like moons orbiting a particularly arrogant planet. Maya noticed that several faculty members were also present, including Dean, whose energy-based form flickered with what might have been anticipation. "Before we reveal the rankings," announced Professor, a elderly crystalline overlord whose faceted body chimed softly with each word, "I want to remind you that placement scores are not final judgments of your potential. They simply indicate which courses will provide you with the most appropriate level of challenge for your current capabilities." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the assembled students. Maya caught sight of Lux near the front of the crowd, their energy form dimmer than usual with anxiety. She'd grown fond of the strange ethereal over the past day. There was something refreshingly honest about someone who struggled with basic matter interactions but could manipulate quantum fields with their thoughts. "However," Professor continued, "this year's results include some truly unprecedented achievements. Several students have scored at levels that exceed our previous records, forcing us to recalibrate our expectations for first-year performance." Maya felt a cold knot form in her stomach. That sounded exactly like the kind of attention she'd been hoping to avoid. "Rankings will be displayed by category first, then overall," the professor announced. "Mathematical reasoning scores beginning with the highest achievers." The first holographic display materialized above the crowd, showing a list of names and scores that made several students gasp in disbelief. Orr's name appeared in third place with a score of 2,847 out of 3,000, a genuinely impressive result that would have placed him in the top 1% of academy admissions for the past century. But above him, in second place, was of the Hive Mind Collective with 2,923 points. Maya wasn't surprised by that. Collective intelligence species had natural advantages in pure mathematical processing, though they typically struggled with more creative challenges. And in first place, with a score of 2,987 out of 3,000, was Maya. The hall fell completely silent. Maya maintained her composure even as she felt hundreds of eyes turning toward her, but internally she was cursing her own overconfidence. She'd been trying to score well enough to avoid suspicion while still winning her wager with Orr, but apparently she'd miscalculated the curve. A 2,987 wasn't just a good score. It was the kind of result that would have been remarkable for a crystalline overlord, let alone a supposedly primitive human. Orr's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, disbelief, anger, and finally, a kind of calculating suspicion that Maya found deeply concerning. His neural implants were pulsing rapidly, probably accessing every database he could reach to try and understand what he was seeing. "Spatial reasoning scores," Professor announced, apparently oblivious to the tension that had gripped the crowd. The second display materialized, and Maya's heart sank even further. She'd placed first again, this time with a score that was barely within the theoretical maximum range. Or hadn't even made the top 5. Spatial reasoning was notoriously difficult for species that had evolved in standard three-dimensional environments. Xenobiology rankings. Third place this time, which was still far higher than any human had ever achieved, but at least suggested some limitations in her capabilities. Maya began to hope that her scores would level out in the remaining categories, presenting a picture of someone who was gifted but not impossibly so. Quantum engineering results. First place again, with a score that made Professor pause and double-check his readings before announcing it. Maya had not only solved the repair scenario, but had provided improvements that the Academy's own engineering faculty was still trying to fully understand. Applied impossibility theory. The silence in the hall was now so complete that Maya could hear the hum of the station's life support systems. Her score in this category wasn't just first place. It was higher than any student had ever achieved, including several legendary figures who had gone on to reshape galactic civilization. And finally, the integration challenge results. Maya closed her eyes briefly, already knowing what she was going to see. When the display materialized, her score was so far beyond anything in Academy records that Professor actually asked the computer to verify the results twice before reading them aloud. "Overall rankings," the professor announced, his crystalline voice betraying a note of bewilderment. "In first place with the highest placement scores in Academy history, Maya of Earth." The explosion of noise that followed was unlike anything Maya had experienced. Students shouted in disbelief. Faculty members clustered around data displays trying to understand what they were seeing, and several individuals began making urgent communications to colleagues across the galaxy. Maya stood at the center of it all, no longer able to maintain her facade of surprised modesty. Or pushed through the crowd toward her, his silver skin flushed with what was probably the equivalent of rage. "This is impossible," he snarled when he reached her. "No human could achieve these scores legitimately. You must have cheated somehow." "Careful," Maya said quietly, though there was something in her voice that made the take an involuntary step backward. "You're about to accuse me of something that would require me to have outsmarted the most advanced testing systems in the galaxy. Are you sure that's the argument you want to make?" Before or could respond, Dean materialized beside them, their energy form pulsing with intense interest. "Student, if you would accompany me to my office, there are some questions we need to discuss regarding your performance." Maya nodded, having expected this development. As she followed the dean's floating form out of the hall, she caught Lux's eye and saw her own concerns reflected in the ethereal's energy patterns. Whatever was about to happen, her secret was definitely in jeopardy. The dean's office existed in a space that seemed to bend reality around itself. The walls showed glimpses of distant galaxies, mathematical equations wrote themselves in streams of light across the ceiling, and the furniture adapted its form to accommodate visitors from dozens of different species. Maya settled into a chair that molded itself to her human physiology while trying to prepare for what was certainly going to be a difficult conversation. "Before we begin," Dean said, "I want you to understand that you are not in trouble. Your scores, while unprecedented, were achieved through legitimate means. Our monitoring systems are quite thorough in detecting any form of cheating or external assistance." That was something of a relief, though Maya suspected the real questions were yet to come. "However," the dean continued, "your performance raises significant questions about our understanding of human cognitive potential. According to our records, your species has never demonstrated the kind of mental capabilities your scores suggest. We need to understand whether you represent a new development in human evolution, or whether our initial assessments of your species were somehow flawed." Maya had prepared for this moment, though she'd hoped to delay it for much longer. The truth was complicated in ways that the Academy wasn't ready to understand, but she could at least provide part of the explanation. "Dean, what do your records tell you about human neurology?" she asked. The dean's form shifted, accessing vast databases with casual ease. "Standard carbon-based neural networks, relatively low processing speeds compared to most advanced species, limited capacity for multidimensional thinking. Your species shows creativity and adaptability, but generally lacks the raw intellectual power for advanced scientific research." "And those assessments were based on how many human test subjects?" There was a pause as the dean checked the relevant files. "Approximately 12,000 individuals over the past 3 centuries, representing what your governments identified as their most intellectually gifted citizens." Maya nodded. "And in all that time, did anyone think to ask whether those 12,000 individuals actually represented the full range of human cognitive potential?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm not sure I understand your implication." "Human populations include significant genetic diversity," Maya explained carefully. "Not all of that diversity is immediately visible or well understood by our own scientists. It's possible that your test subjects, while representing the best of what human institutions could identify, didn't actually capture the full spectrum of what our species is capable of." It wasn't exactly a lie, though it wasn't the complete truth either. Maya was indeed something beyond normal human parameters, but not in the way the dean was probably imagining. "Are you suggesting that you represent some kind of hidden human subspecies?" asked, their energy form brightening with scientific curiosity. "I'm suggesting that human cognitive development might be more complex than your initial surveys indicated," Maya replied diplomatically. "Perhaps there are individuals whose capabilities only emerge under specific circumstances or with appropriate training." The dean considered this for several minutes, their form shifting through patterns that probably represented deep contemplation. "That would explain some of the anomalies we've detected in your neural patterns," they finally said. "Our scanning systems have been having difficulty categorizing your thought processes. They show characteristics we've never encountered before." Maya tried to look curious rather than alarmed. "What kind of characteristics?" Parallel processing streams that shouldn't be possible with organic neural networks, quantum coherence effects in your synaptic activity, and computational speeds that approach those of our most advanced artificial intelligences, explained. We initially assumed these were measurement errors, but the consistency of the readings suggests they're genuine phenomena. This was getting into dangerous territory. Maya needed to provide explanations that would satisfy the dean's curiosity without revealing information that could compromise her mission. Human neural development is influenced by many factors, she said carefully. Environmental conditions, educational approaches, even social dynamics can affect how our brains organize themselves. It's possible that I've simply been exposed to a combination of factors that allowed my neural networks to develop in unusual ways. Interesting, the dean mused. We'll definitely need to study this further. In the meantime, your scores have qualified you for some very advanced coursework. I'm placing you directly into several graduate-level programs, including Advanced Impossibility Theory and Multidimensional Engineering. Professor specifically requested to work with you after seeing your integration challenge results. Maya's enhanced memory immediately pulled up references to Professor, one of the Academy's most brilliant and notoriously demanding instructors, known for pushing students past their perceived limitations and occasionally discovering entirely new branches of science in the process. Being assigned to work with him was either a tremendous opportunity or a recipe for complete exposure. I'm honored by the assignment, she said, though I hope I won't disappoint him if my performance doesn't live up to these initial results. Student, the dean said, their energy form pulsing with what might have been amusement. I suspect that disappointment is the least likely outcome of your academic career here. As Maya left the dean's office, her mind was already racing through the implications of everything that had just happened. Her placement scores had achieved exactly what she'd hoped, establishing her as an exceptional student worthy of advanced research opportunities. But they'd also painted a target on her back that was going to be difficult to manage. The corridor outside the dean's office was lined with windows that showed the vast expanse of space surrounding Station Prometheus. Hundreds of ships from dozens of different civilizations moved through the void, carrying students, faculty, and researchers from across the galaxy to this nexus of learning and discovery. Maya watched the traffic patterns for several minutes, marveling at the casual demonstration of technologies that her own species could barely comprehend. But that was about to change. Everything the Academy represented, the accumulated knowledge of advanced civilizations, the cutting-edge research into the fundamental nature of reality, the networks of collaboration that spanned entire star clusters, was exactly what humanity needed to take its next step forward. Maya's mission was to learn everything she could, to prove that humans deserved a place among the galactic powers, and to lay the groundwork for her species' transformation from primitives to equals. Her placement exam scores had just made that mission significantly more complicated, but they'd also opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed for years. The challenge now was walking through those doors without revealing more about herself than was safe. As she made her way back toward the student quarters, Maya reflected on the conversation she'd just had with Dean. The dean's questions had been probing but not hostile, more curious than suspicious. That suggested the Academy was genuinely interested in understanding her capabilities rather than exposing them as fraudulent. But Orr was a different matter entirely. His accusation of cheating had been reflexive, born of wounded pride and cognitive dissonance, but his expression as she'd left the hall suggested that he wasn't going to simply accept defeat. Were known for their logical approach to problem-solving, and Orr would undoubtedly be applying that logic to the question of how a human had managed to outperform him so dramatically. Maya needed allies, and she needed them quickly. Lux was a start. The ethereal seemed genuinely friendly and was dealing with their own challenges as an outsider at the Academy. But she'd need more than one friend to navigate the complex social and political landscape she was about to enter. Her enhanced senses picked up a familiar electromagnetic signature approaching from behind, and she turned to see Lux floating toward her, their energy form flickering with obvious agitation. Maya, the ethereal called out, I've been looking everywhere for you. Is everything all right? The way the dean whisked you away after the rankings were announced. I'm fine, Maya assured them, though she appreciated the concern. The dean just wanted to understand my test performance better. Apparently my scores were a bit higher than expected. A bit higher? Lux's form pulsed with what might have been incredulous laughter. Maya, you didn't just score higher than expected, you scored higher than anyone thought was possible. Do you have any idea what this means? Maya was beginning to get a sense of it, but she was curious to hear Lux's perspective. What does it mean? It means every major research institution in the galaxy is going to want to study you, Lux explained, their energy crackling with excitement and worry. It means are going to want to dissect your brain to understand how human neural networks can achieve those processing speeds. It means you're going to become the most famous human in galactic history, whether you want to be or not. That was exactly what Maya had been afraid of, though hearing it stated so bluntly made the situation feel even more precarious. But it also means, Lux continued, their voice dropping to barely audible levels, that you might be the key to changing how the galaxy views your entire species. No one can dismiss humans as primitives anymore, not after seeing what you've accomplished. Maya felt a surge of satisfaction at that thought. Changing perceptions had always been part of her mission, though she'd hoped to do it more gradually and with less personal attention. There's something else, Lux added, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. I've been monitoring the Academy's communication networks. It's something my species does naturally, and there's been a massive spike in data transmission since your scores were announced. Faculty members are contacting colleagues across the galaxy, and there are research requests flooding in from institutions that normally take decades to respond to anything. Research requests for what? For you, Lux said simply. Everyone wants to understand what you represent. Some of the requests are academic, cognitive scientists wanting to study your neural patterns, evolutionary biologists wanting to understand how your capabilities developed. But others are more concerning. Military research divisions, corporate biowarfare departments, even some groups I couldn't identify from their transmission signatures. Maya felt her blood run cold. She'd known that exceptional performance would attract attention, but she hadn't fully considered the implications of that attention extending beyond the Academy itself. How much time do we have before these research requests start being processed? She asked. It varies, Lux replied, but some of the more urgent ones could be approved within days. The Academy has significant autonomy, but they also depend on funding from major galactic institutions, if enough pressure is applied. Maya nodded grimly. Her situation had just become significantly more complicated, but there was no going back now. She'd revealed too much to maintain a low profile, which meant she needed to adapt her strategy to work with higher visibility rather than against it. Thank you for the warning, she said. I think I'm going to need all the friends I can get over the next few weeks. You've got me, Lux said immediately. And probably more supporters than you realize. Your performance today didn't just impress the faculty. It inspired a lot of students who have felt like outsiders here. You've proven that the Academy's assumptions about species capabilities might be wrong, which gives hope to everyone who's ever felt underestimated. As they walked together toward the student common areas, Maya found herself reassessing her entire approach to the Academy. She'd come here planning to be a spy, gathering information while maintaining a carefully constructed facade. But her placement scores had effectively ended that possibility. Now she was going to have to be something much more dangerous, a symbol, a representative not just of human potential, but of the possibility that the galaxy's comfortable assumptions about intelligence and capability might be fundamentally flawed. The education she'd hoped to receive was certainly going to continue, but she was beginning to realize that she might end up teaching as much as she learned. And given what she knew about humanity's true nature, knowledge that even she didn't fully understand, the lessons she taught might reshape the galaxy in ways that no one could predict. Maya looked out at the stars surrounding Station Prometheus and smiled grimly. Her quiet infiltration of the Academy was over, but something much more significant was just beginning. Professor's laboratory existed in a state of controlled impossibility that made Maya's enhanced senses ache, just to perceive it. The space folded in on itself through dimensions that shouldn't have been accessible to three-dimensional beings, while equipment that violated basic physics hummed quietly in corners that were somehow both infinitely distant and immediately present. Maya had been studying advanced spatial mathematics for days in preparation for this meeting, but actually experiencing the environment was overwhelming in ways her preparation couldn't have anticipated. "Student," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Welcome to the real academy. Professor materialized from what looked like a gap in reality itself. A tall, ethereal figure whose species Maya couldn't immediately identify. They appeared humanoid at first glance, but closer inspection revealed that their form shifted subtly depending on the angle of observation, as if they existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and she was only seeing cross-sections of their true shape. Professor, Maya said, trying to project confidence while her brain struggled to process the visual contradictions around her. Thank you for agreeing to work with me. Agreeing? The professor's laugh was like crystalline bells echoing through non-Euclidean space. Student, after reviewing your integration challenge performance, I would have moved to have you assigned to my research team even if you had declined the opportunity yourself. What you accomplished in that scenario should have been impossible for any individual consciousness, regardless of species. Maya felt a familiar chill of concern. Impossible how? Professor gestured toward a wall that suddenly displayed a complex holographic reconstruction of her test performance. Maya watched herself navigate the virtual challenges, but from this external perspective, she could see patterns in her behavior that hadn't been apparent during the actual examination. You weren't just solving problems sequentially, the professor explained. You were maintaining parallel solution streams for dozens of different challenges simultaneously, integrating insights from completely unrelated fields in real time, and adapting to new paradigms faster than our monitoring systems could track. Most impressive of all, you were doing this while somehow maintaining coherent consciousness across multiple conceptual frameworks that should have been mutually incompatible. The holographic replay showed Maya's virtual form moving through impossible geometries while simultaneously manipulating quantum equations, treating alien patients, and conducting complex negotiations, all apparently without effort or confusion. Watching it from outside, even she was impressed by the performance. The closest analogs we have to this kind of cognitive behavior, Professor continued, are certain types of distributed artificial intelligences and the collective minds of some hive species, but you're clearly an individual organic consciousness. The question is, how? Maya had been dreading this conversation, but she'd also been preparing for it. Her cover story about hidden human cognitive potential would only stretch so far before requiring more specific explanations. Professor, what do you know about human evolutionary history? She asked. Standard carbon-based development on a relatively primitive world, replied promptly. Your species evolved from hunter-gatherer origins through agricultural and industrial phases before developing space travel. Typical pattern for emergent civilizations, though somewhat slower than average. And our neural development. Again, fairly standard. Brain-to-body ratio consistent with other tool-using species, neural complexity appropriate for social cooperation and basic problem-solving. Nothing that would suggest exceptional cognitive potential. Maya nodded carefully. That assessment is based on studies of typical human populations, but what if I told you that human evolution includes some unusual variations that haven't been widely documented? Professor's form shimmered with what might have been intense interest. What kind of variations? The kind that only emerge under specific environmental pressures, Maya said, choosing her words carefully. Human populations have been subject to a wide range of evolutionary influences over our history. Some of those influences produced adaptations that don't manifest until particular circumstances arise. It was technically true, though the circumstances she was referring to were far more complex than simple environmental pressure. Maya's capabilities weren't the result of natural evolution. They were the product of something much more deliberate. Fascinating, the professor mused. Are you suggesting that you represent some kind of dormant human subspecies? I'm suggesting that human potential might be more variable than initial surveys indicated, Maya replied diplomatically. Perhaps certain individuals develop enhanced cognitive abilities under conditions that weren't present during previous testing. Professor studied her for several long moments, their multidimensional form shifting through configurations that probably represented deep thought processes. Finally, they seemed to reach a decision. Student, I'm going to share something with you that's not generally known outside the Academy's senior faculty, they said. Your test results weren't just unprecedented for a human, they were unprecedented for any individual consciousness we've ever recorded. The cognitive flexibility you demonstrated exceeds even our most advanced AI systems. Maya tried to look surprised rather than concerned. I'm not sure I understand the implications of that. The implications, the professor said, their voice carrying undertones that made the laboratory's impossible architecture vibrate sympathetically, are that either our understanding of consciousness itself is fundamentally flawed, or you represent something entirely new in galactic civilization. Before Maya could respond, an alarm chimed softly through the laboratory's twisted space. Professor gestured, and a holographic communication interface materialized in the air between them. "Professor," said the voice of Dean, though their energy-based form wasn't visible in the projection. "I need you and student to report to the administrative center immediately. We have a situation." The urgency in the dean's tone made Maya's enhanced senses go on high alert. What kind of situation? The kind that involves 3 different galactic governments demanding access to our student, 2 military research divisions claiming authority over her test data, and a delegation from the Eternal Archive requesting immediate diplomatic immunity for what they're calling a unique consciousness phenomenon, the dean replied grimly. It appears that students' placement scores have attracted more attention than we anticipated. Maya felt her carefully constructed plans crumbling around her. The attention she'd hoped to avoid was now bearing down on the Academy with the full weight of interstellar politics behind it. "We'll be right there," Professor said, closing the communication link. They turned to Maya with an expression that seemed oddly protective. "Student, I want you to understand that the Academy takes the safety and autonomy of its students very seriously. Whatever these outside parties want, you are under our protection as long as you remain enrolled here." "And how long is that protection likely to last against this level of pressure?" Maya asked. "That depends on several factors," the professor admitted, "including how honest you've been with us about the nature of your capabilities." The journey to the administrative center took them through corridors that Maya was beginning to recognize as the Academy's true working spaces, areas where the laws of physics were treated more as suggestions than absolute rules. Students and faculty moved through impossible geometries with casual familiarity, their various forms adapted to environments that would have killed most organic life instantly. Maya noticed that they were attracting significant attention as they walked. Conversations paused when she passed, and she caught fragments of discussion in dozens of different languages. Words like unprecedented, anomalous, and potential paradigm shift seemed to follow in her wake. "How many people know about my test scores?" she asked Professor quietly. "In specific detail, only senior faculty and administration," the professor replied. "But the general fact that a human student achieved record-breaking results has spread throughout the Academy community, and from there to the broader galactic networks," Maya finished. She should have anticipated this. The Academy's reputation meant that any significant developments here would automatically be monitored by intelligence services, research institutions, and political organizations across dozens of worlds. The administrative center was a massive sphere suspended in what appeared to be open space, connected to the Academy's main structure by bridges that existed in folded dimensions. As they approached the center, Maya could see ships from multiple civilizations docked at various ports, sleek research vessels, massive diplomatic craft, and several designs she didn't recognize but whose energy signatures suggested military origins. "Quite the welcoming committee," Professor observed dryly. Inside the administrative center, the main conference chamber had been expanded to accommodate representatives from what looked like half the galaxy's major powers. Maya recognized symbols and uniforms from the Science Consortium, the Military Research Division, the Crystalline Overlord University System, and at least 6 other major institutions. At the center of it all, Dean's energy form pulsed with what was probably the equivalent of extreme diplomatic stress. "Ah, student," the dean said as they entered. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing your academic future." "My future?" Maya looked around the room at the assembled representatives, all of whom were studying her with varying degrees of interest, suspicion, and barely concealed greed. "I was under the impression that my future was my own decision." "Under normal circumstances, absolutely," said an official whose neural implants marked him as high-ranking government representative. "But your test results suggest capabilities that extend far beyond normal academic interest. The Consortium's Bioresearch Division has identified at least 17 different areas where your cognitive patterns could advance our understanding of consciousness itself." The Empire seconds this assessment, rumbled a massive floating entity whose liquid form rippled with complex mathematical patterns. Such unique neural architecture could provide insights into the fundamental nature of intelligence. We would be honored to provide facilities for comprehensive study. Study, Maya's voice remained calm, but Professor could probably see the dangerous glint that was starting to appear in her eyes. You mean experimentation? Research, corrected another representative, this one from the Eternal Archive, a pangalactic organization dedicated to preserving knowledge. Your cognitive patterns represent a genuinely unique phenomenon. The archive has a responsibility to understand and document such rarities for future generations. Maya looked around the room at the assembled officials, each representing institutions with resources that dwarfed entire star systems. They were talking about her as if she were a laboratory specimen rather than a person, their academic language barely concealing their intention to dissect whatever made her special. "And what exactly are you proposing?" she asked quietly. "Cooperative research programs," the official said smoothly. "Voluntary participation in studies designed to understand your unique capabilities. You would be compensated generously, of course, and would maintain significant autonomy over the research process." Translation: they want to put me in a laboratory and run tests until they understand how to replicate whatever they think makes me special, Maya said, her voice still level but carrying undertones that made several representatives shift uncomfortably. "Student," Dean interjected, "please understand that these are preliminary discussions. The Academy has not committed to any particular course of action." "But you're considering their proposals," Maya observed, "which suggests that my status as a student here might not be as secure as I was led to believe." "The Academy values its autonomy," Professor said suddenly, their multidimensional form radiating what felt like protective authority. "But we also understand that certain discoveries transcend institutional boundaries. The question is whether students' capabilities represent such a discovery." Maya felt the weight of dozens of alien gazes upon her, each pair of eyes, or sensory organs, evaluating her potential value. These beings represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization, species that had mastered technologies humans could barely comprehend, institutions that had preserved knowledge for millions of years. And they were all interested in taking her apart to see how she worked. It was time for a demonstration. "You want to understand my capabilities?" Maya asked, her voice carrying a new edge that made the air in the chamber seem to vibrate. "Let me show you something." She closed her eyes and let her consciousness expand beyond the careful limitations she'd maintained since arriving at the Academy. Instantly, her awareness flooded through the administrative center's information networks, accessing databases and communication systems with casual ease. She could see the private communications between the various representatives, their real agendas and hidden motivations laid bare in streams of intercepted data. But more than that, she could perceive the fundamental structure of the center itself, the quantum foundations that supported its impossible architecture, the dimensional anchors that kept it stable in folded space, the energy flows that powered systems beyond the comprehension of most organic minds. With a thought, Maya began to modify those flows. The lights in the chamber dimmed and then brightened in patterns that formed complex mathematical equations. The air itself began to shimmer as she manipulated the local gravitational fields, creating visual distortions that shouldn't have been possible without massive industrial equipment. And through it all, she maintained perfect awareness of every conversation, every thought pattern, every technological system within a radius that encompassed the entire Academy. When she opened her eyes again, the chamber was dead silent. "My cognitive capabilities," Maya said quietly, "include direct interface with quantum-level information systems, real-time manipulation of localized space-time geometry, and parallel processing streams that operate faster than your most advanced computers. I am not a laboratory specimen to be studied. I am something you have never encountered before." The silence stretched for several more moments before the representative's liquid form began to ripple with what might have been fear. "Impossible," it whispered. "No organic consciousness should be able to interface directly with quantum substrates." "And yet," Maya said, allowing a small smile to play across her lips, "here I am." Dean's energy form pulsed with patterns that probably represented intense contemplation. "Student, What you just demonstrated suggests capabilities that extend far beyond even our most optimistic projections. How is this possible? Maya looked around the room at the assembled representatives, all of whom were now studying her with a mixture of awe and terror. She'd abandoned any pretense of being a normal human, but perhaps that was for the best. These beings needed to understand that they weren't dealing with a primitive species anymore. "Dean," she said finally, "I think it's time we had a more honest conversation about what humanity actually represents." The representatives leaned forward as one, their various forms radiating intense interest. Maya, the supposedly primitive human student, was about to teach the galaxy's most advanced civilizations their first lesson in why it was dangerous to underestimate a species based on incomplete information. And that was only the beginning of what she had to show them. The emergency council chamber of the Academy had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate what was rapidly becoming the most significant gathering in galactic history. Representatives from 47 different civilizations filled the expanded space, their various forms creating a living catalog of evolutionary diversity. But every eye, sensor, and consciousness in the room was focused on the single human figure standing at the chamber's center. Maya had discarded all pretense of limitation. Her consciousness flowed through the Academy's quantum networks like water, simultaneously maintaining awareness of thousands of different data streams while monitoring the biometric readings of every being in the chamber. The demonstration she'd given 3 days ago had been just a glimpse of her true capabilities. Now she was preparing to reveal truths that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of intelligence itself. "Before I explain what humanity truly represents," Maya began, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in the listeners' minds, "I need you to understand something about the nature of consciousness itself." Dean's energy form pulsed with intense interest. "Please continue." "You've all made the same fundamental assumption," Maya said, beginning to pace in patterns that created subtle gravitational distortions in the chamber's artificial field. "You've assumed that consciousness is limited by the physical substrates that produce it. Organic brains, quantum processors, crystalline matrices. You see these as boundaries that define what kinds of thoughts are possible." "Are they not?" asked the senior representative from the Crystalline Overlord University system. Her faceted form chimed softly with each word. "Our research has consistently shown that cognitive capability correlates directly with processing substrate complexity." Maya smiled, and for a moment her form seemed to flicker as if existing in multiple states simultaneously. "That's true for consciousness that remains confined to its original substrate. But what happens when consciousness learns to transcend those boundaries?" She gestured, and the chamber's holographic display systems activated without any visible input from her. Complex diagrams appeared in the air, showing neural network structures that seemed to exist in far more than 3 dimensions. "Human consciousness is unique," Maya continued, "not because of its processing power or its architectural elegance, but because of its inherent instability. Most species develop neural patterns that lock into stable configurations over evolutionary time. You become very good at specific types of thinking, but you lose flexibility." The diagram shifted, showing comparative neural patterns from dozens of different species. Each one displayed characteristic patterns: the rapid logical processing streams, the mathematical manipulation matrices, the crystalline overlord's hierarchical information structures. "But human neural networks," Maya said, highlighting a pattern that seemed to shift and flow even as they watched, "never fully stabilize. We retain quantum uncertainty at the synaptic level, which normally makes us less efficient at specific cognitive tasks. However, under the right conditions, this instability becomes a tremendous advantage." "What kind of conditions?" Professor asked, their multidimensional form leaning forward with obvious fascination. "Conditions that require consciousness to adapt beyond its original parameters," Maya replied. "For most humans, these conditions never arise. They live their entire lives within the cognitive boundaries that evolution provided. But occasionally, circumstances demand more." She paused, and suddenly every being in the chamber could feel her consciousness touching the edges of their own minds. Not, but with a gentle pressure that demonstrated capabilities they'd never imagined possible. "I was one of those cases," Maya said quietly. "Born with neural patterns that were unstable even by human standards. My early life was difficult. Standard human education systems couldn't accommodate the way my mind processed information. I thought in parallel streams, perceived patterns that others couldn't see, and experienced reality as a fluid system of interconnected possibilities rather than a fixed structure of facts. The holographic displays shifted again, showing brain scans that made several of the assembled scientists gasp in recognition. Maya's neural activity patterns looked less like those of an organic mind, and more like the quantum processing matrices used in the most advanced artificial intelligences. By the time I reached adolescence, Maya continued, I was functionally isolated from normal human society. My thought processes were accelerating beyond baseline parameters, and I was beginning to interface directly with electronic systems without conscious effort. My parents thought I was developing some kind of neurological disorder. What changed? Asked the Eternal Archive representative, their crystalline body resonating with harmonics of intense curiosity. First contact, Maya said simply. When your initial survey teams visited Earth 3 centuries ago, they conducted cognitive assessments on human populations. The testing protocols you used were designed to evaluate conventional consciousness within normal parameters. But they also generated specific electromagnetic frequencies that interacted with unstable human neural patterns in unexpected ways.